Hey guys, it's Elena. Today we're going to do another installment of Create with Intuition, a monthly practice where we explore intuitive and visual art prompts. This month's theme is Divergence, which is the point where two things split off from one another. I find this concept fascinating because it has so many meanings in different fields of study, and it also reminds me of neurodivergence. So I wanted to explore 5 different questions which can help us interpret this prompt. The first question is, how can you emphasize contrasting elements? So to do this, we could use opposing shapes, colors, or textures to emphasize the separation and create a sense of tension. Number 2, what color combinations can convey divergence? You could pair warm and cool colors, contrasting shades, or sudden transitions between hues so that you could create this visual conflict and enhance that sense of divergence. Number 3, how can you depict fragmentation in your art? So you could incorporate fragmented shapes, disrupted patterns, or chaotic arrangements to emphasize the idea of separation and disconnection. Number 4, how can balance and imbalance portray divergence? So we can experiment with asymmetrical compositions, uneven distribution of visual weight, or elements that create a sense of tension and instability. And finally, how can contrasting artistic styles portray divergence? So we could combine different styles, different mediums, or techniques to create a visual tension and emphasize the idea of two elements being at odds with each other. To further inspire our creative exploration of divergence, this month's visual prompt is squares. And squares can represent structure, stability, and conformity, but can also symbolize out-of-the-box thinking, which is why I thought of this to go along with divergence. I have created this photo collection on Unsplash, and the link for this is in the description below. What you are looking at now is my interpretation of this month's art prompts, which I will show you the process video for in just a moment. For my interpretation, I used my Painterly brush set, and it's available for sale in my shop at the link below. However, this is just my interpretation of the intuitive and visual prompt, and this is just a jumping off point so that you can explore your own intuition and create something that is meaningful for you. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm opening up my Create with Intuition art journal here, and you can see here I have all my previous month's artworks, and I'm opening up a new page for April 2023. And I will be working with my Painterly brush set primarily for this project. I mostly just missed working with it. I hadn't worked with it for a while. And of course, all the links for the purchase of my brush sets are in the description. You are very welcome to use whatever brushes you want to use and whatever you feel inspired to use with these prompts. So I just chose to go ahead with the Painterly brush set. And the color palette that I chose to work with is called Monet Water Lilies, and this also comes with my Painterly brush set. And I wanted to use this for the concept of divergence because there's a lot of different colors in here. We've got these dark brown and a dark blue on the other side. We have these pinks, and there's a really nice contrast between the warm pink and the cold blue. So that's why I chose to work with this color palette for this concept of divergence. So that's how I'm kind of interpreting the questions. So I'm opening up now my Unsplash collection, which is based on the visual cue of squares. And I've included a link to this collection in the description. So rather than choosing one image and making that be my reference picture, I'm just kind of scrolling through to get a feeling for what this concept is and some different ways to interpret the concept of squares, and just kind of taking in that inspiration. So I really like how these ones, for instance, have got a circle contrasting with the square that has all this cool texture on it. I really like this blue and pink one here with the 3 squares, even though it's really minimalist and that's not usually my style, but I just love that contrast and how the blue and the pink kind of set each other off. That's really cool. I also really love this one and how it's got these squares that are all symmetrical, but then there's these larger squares in the middle that have photos and drawings inside of them, and I really think that's a nice contrast that goes with our concept nicely. So I'm just going back to the Procreate app now, having gotten a bit inspired by those images of squares. So I had in mind I would do one big square down here in the right-hand corner and then do smaller squares kind of going up towards the left-hand top corner. So I'm going into my painterly brush set, and I wanted to mostly work with the flat gesso brush to make my main squares, just because it lends itself to squares. And this is not a pressure sensitive brush, so I'm going to be changing the size every now and then. And so I just made the size go as big as it could, and I'm choosing this dark red from the Water Lilies color palette. And I'm going to make my very large square here in the bottom right corner in the dark red color. And I'm just making this square by making some lines going down in the flat gesso brush and just kind of going over that a couple of times. And this is in 2x speed. I just didn't want to bore you, but it took a little while. So at this point, I am going to make the brush size smaller and continue adding more squares on top of this in different colors. So as I continue to add more squares, I am doing this all with the flat gesso brush and all in the same layer because I want the paint to mix and blend with what's already there. So I'm just going to speed this up a little bit and continue adding these squares. So I'm done adding my squares at this point, and I wanted to kind of have the squares dispersing out towards the left like this. So that's kind of what I'm trying to achieve by kind of changing the direction of the squares. And I do want to add some metallics, but I actually realized at this point that I wanted to add some canvas to this. So I'm going to add a new layer above what I've got here, and I'm just going to group those together so that now these are one page in my page assist, and I'm going to rename that group April 2023. So now I've got two layers in that group. So I'm renaming both of the layers within that as well as my paint layer and my canvas layer. And in order to put some canvas in here, I'm going to switch to my AJ Canvas and Texture brush folder, which comes with the Painterly brush set. And I'm going with my Cotton Duck Canvas brush within that brush set. So I wanted to go ahead and use this navy blue that I've been using for some of these squares as well. And it's not going to come out really strongly as a navy blue when I use it as a canvas, but it's just going to have a hint of that same color. So with the opacity and the size all the way up, I'm just taking that canvas brush across the whole screen, and you can see that it has appeared. So when I hit that N, I can change the blend mode, and you can experiment with a lot of different blend modes. But what I eventually ended up with was the screen blend mode. And that is mostly because I just like how the paint looks really thick when I'm using this blend mode. So you can't really see the canvas on top of the paint. It's only sort of behind the paint. You could, of course, put it in normal blend mode and then put that layer behind everything else, which I do sometimes. And I thought about using multiply, but you can see that the canvas is really see-through through the paint, so it looks a lot more like watercolor or gouache or something like that. So I wanted the paint to look thick, which is why I did go with screen on that. But you can definitely experiment with blend modes and see what you like best. So at this point, I felt like the whole piece was just crying out for metallic paint. And maybe that's just me, that's just what I really love. And I feel like that kind of plays into the whole divergence concept of having contrasting things going on. So I went up to my layers and added a new layer above everything else, and I renamed that metallics. And I do always add metallics in their own layer because otherwise they might look kind of white because they do interact with what's in that layer already. So I have chosen a different color that is not in the color palette that I was previously using. And the hex code for this color is 786226. That's just a color that I really like to use for gold, and I have some metallics in my Painterly brush set that I'm going to be using. Of course, I do have an entire folder of metallic brushes called Gold Rush. That's a different brush set that I sell. I just love metallics, and I always tend to include some metallics in each of my brush sets. So the one I'm going to use is called Metallic Paint, and it is in the Painterly brush set as well. Of course, you might be doing something completely different and not using metallics at all. And this whole series is just about experimentation. So this is just what I'm doing, but you might be doing something totally different. So anyway, what I'm going to do now in this new layer is I'm just going to add some metallic squares. So to finish off, I've added a new layer called metallics below, and it's underneath of everything because I did want to have some metallics coming up from underneath of the paint as well. So I'm still using my metallic paint brush from the Painterly brush set, and I made it really small. And I was going to do some really big fat lines going up behind this, but I decided that would be a bit too emphatic. So I wanted to contrast these squares with some really wispy small lines. And so that's what I'm doing. Just out of this top left corner of the red square, I'm adding some very faint wispy metallic lines. And just for consistency, I wanted to add the same wispy lines coming down of the bottom right corner as well, just to kind of make this consistency of these wispy lines coming out from behind the red square. So I am pretty happy with how this turned out. I could, of course, have added a lot more squares and made it less minimalist, but I feel like this, for me, is conveying the concept of divergence because we have these lines contrasting with the squares, and we have the metallic contrasting with the colors, and we have cold and we have warm colors. And so for me, this is portraying that concept. So there we have it. Thank you so much for joining me for my interpretation of these art prompts today. And I hope that this has sparked your creativity and encouraged you to push your own boundaries and find your own interpretation of these prompts. And I would love it if you want to share your artwork in our Facebook group or on Instagram using the hashtag #CreateWithIntuition. Please consider subscribing if you want more videos like this. And if you're interested in the Painterly brush set that I used, you can find a link in the description below with more information about that. So I hope that you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.